Hi, welcome back. This is Story Time in episode 2. My name is Rosemary. This episode, we will talk about Ra and Osiris and the fractals thereafter. So, as touched on in episode 1, pertaining to the story of Ra and creation, in this celestial concert of overlapping multiverses or multiple perspectives, there's a direct relation to the Alpha Big Bang and the Omega Gate event horizon, which all timelines will converge into one 0 point event horizon or server if they are attached to the source live server. In this episode, we will be looking at the similarities in creation stories, the multiversal broken realities, and the correlation to many end time prophecies. This story starts with a more in-depth look at the story of Ra and other creation stories that intersect and fan out throughout time's telephone game, the time dilation within the matrix construct or body of source itself. So if you're looking at our visual component, because there is a video with this, and then I encourage those to actually come and join our YouTube page at Relatively Speaking 2020, where you can actually watch the video component of this. I do have on the side of my video the Flower of Life pattern on the top left, as well as Metatron's cube, scrolling down, and how those flower patterns actually equate to the Tree of Life, or the Kabbalic Tree of Life and the Flower of Life pattern, and how it connects to the human figure and the chakra systems itself. And then on the bottom right, I have the star constellation Orion and how the stars itself and the belt actually points through Taurus and to the Pleiades themselves. Orion has had many myths about the constellation and its pursuit of the bull, or in pursuit of the seven stars of the Pleiades. I do have a picture of the Pleiades as well on my screen and another form of Metatron's cube. So without further ado, we'll start with the sun god Ra. Other names include Aten, Atum, being in his human form, Ra Harahate, Harektete, Horus of the horizon, Amen, and Horus, or the falcon, and Kepri, the scarab beetle, and his conception as the rays of source. There are some older creation myths which show Ra as being androgynous, creating the world without a partner. The cosmic egg, which through the thought Ra manifested the birth of his essence into the celestial computer. Ra used his voice and was said to know the secret name of all things, and so spoke them into existence. In a simulation sense, having the correct spawn codes and names for a creation or what you're trying to spawn in, and being a developer of the simulation would give Source access to spawn anything into the simulation. Even the lotus flower that acted as a shell for Ra, which, as stated before, can also represent the heart chakra blooming as a lotus, when the Kundalini, or the Caduceus, or twin snakes of spiritual healing, is activated from within, a soul becomes awakened. It holds clues, the flower of life pattern with 6 spheres from one central point. And another fractal of this creation is a story in Polynesia of Ta-Awaroe, a supreme deity and creator who developed himself within a shell called Timi-Iti. The outer portion of the shell was named Rumia, and existed before creation in a primeval void of darkness called Po. Ta-Aroa would, after eons, emerge from the shell and see he was alone and create a new shell, and a process that was an ever-going process and was similar to very much of the flower of life 6 petals. So in essence, he created, and his spine eventually became a mountain ridge, his breath the clouds, his appendages earth, and his sweat and exertion from creating the universe the oceans. He also made Atia, or light, which brought about all life, and he had also proclaimed the source, or Tetumu. And looking at the phonetics in the name, we have Ta as Ra, Atia as Atom, and noting the cosmic age of creation and celestial waters of chaos, there are similarities in the shells expanding to the flower of life consciousness, and it's expanding. We also have Atia being a essence or form of Ra in itself, where light was created through the sun. So Ra is often depicted in stories to have 3 daughters, Hathor, Bastet, and Sekhmet, who also could be seen as one goddess at times and also as consorts to Ra. All three daughters were considered the eye of Ra and were extension of Ra's power. Each were created by the fire in Ra's eyes and had different emotional aspects. Hathor, kind and forgiving; Sekhmet, a violent warrior out for vengeance, especially when Ra saw deceitful and unfaithful humans were, and sent her for the destruction of humans in the world; and Bastet, gentle and nurturing. So Hathor was often depicted as a cow, as was Nut, and as a relation the sky, which Ra spoke into existence, that's Nut, and in relation to the celestial zodiac of Taurus and the seven stars, is a very prominent in all world myths, all old world myths anyway. Ra began being androgynous, would have been considered at least a seven sister or the parent sister, so one, and then with six stars around. Another flower of life pattern. So source surrounded by six spheres. Atom surrounded by six electrons. An atom. Electrons being quantum and building further out multiple universes, or the branches that make the multiverse and actually piece together our framework. Ra is often portrayed with these building blocks around them. So again, multiple universes or multiverses. So Ra is often portrayed with a scepter, an Ankh, a sun disk with a cobra surrounding it as a crown, and the head of a hawk. Each evening, Ra would board his sunboat and sink beneath the horizon in death and rebirth. A battle would ensue in those 12 hours of duet, or the underworld or death, between Ra and the dragon Apophis, who is the god of chaos. When Ra was in the underworld, is when he would emerge with Osiris. He would merge with Osiris and emerge the next day, as well as visiting the sun as Orion. In one myth, Osiris was considered the son of Ra. Here's another fractal retelling of the death and rebirth of source life. Before we begin the story of Osiris, let's take into account the depictions of Ra, who is said to have many names and many forms, another affirmation of an incarnation of source. As Atum, he was in the form of a man, hence we get the name Adam in biblical terms. But also look at atom, an atom itself in quantum physics and in physics itself, how the flower of life pattern starts, and having mentioned in episode 1, Ra's return to heaven was from the seven deities of Hathors in the shape of a cow, seventh being the androgynous Ra, source himself. The Pleiades, seven sisters of creation, and how as a human carbon-based form, carbon has 6 electrons, 2 in one shell and 4 in another, equating to 6. 6 quantum electrons, and the 7th proton atom, making the carbon element that on Earth life is consisting of. Source, Adam, and 6 stars of creation, quantum Gaias, and many branches of a multiverse that bloomed out to make the flower of life pattern, the framework which we exist in, which mathematically we see this growth sequence that starts growth in life. Take a seed germinating, and as you watch the seed germinate, you can see how when one leaf pops out and the stem starts to grow, the next leaf will actually pop out in a specific sequence pattern that is coded into that seed germinating or that plant growing. An egg fertilized is going through mitosis. And the way a nautical shell grows, the patterns of plant growth, which is the Fibonacci spiral. Starbursts and much more in our celestial source universe all are attributed to this particular mathematical equation. Interestingly, one of the other aspects, the desert scarab, has been known to use the moon to orient itself, as well as the Milky Way galaxy light on moonless nights. So scarab amulets were often placed on mummies' hearts as to preserve the heart for resurrection in the afterlife. The scarab represented the sun's return from darkness and Ra's trip in duet underworld. Scarab beetles, in an agricultural sense, help in the distribution of seeds throughout the fertile lands. In Egypt, paying close attention in desert travels at night to the scarab beetle's orientation, we begin to see how it equates to Ra's travels and how much ancient humans were attentive to celestial movements. In the previous episode, the aspect of Yahweh being the god of the desert moon is another thread of connection to Ra through the scarab beetle's desert travels in relation to the cosmic age of creation. The heart chakra opening by the revered placement over the heart of the beloved mummies and burials of ancient human pharaohs, who parroted source creation in their life when they were alive. Ra is shown with the sun disk over his head, which is surrounded by a cobra. In celestial computer, Ra uses the sun as a relay to channel his power, connect back to the origin point or alpha big bang for information, and to give life to each Gaia or each seed or petal of the flower of life, which is represented by the ankh he holds in his hand. The scepter, when combined with the snake, represents healing, but is also can be seen as the rod of the creator's dominion or his power over the domain that he is in. The cobra actually surrounding the sun also represents the Ouroboros snake, or the pattern of chaos on the outside, again, even Apophis, which would be the cosmic as what we could see chaos, even though if you take a larger scope back and being as humans in a primitive form, you would not be able to perceive that perspective to take the scope to look back that there's actually order within the chaos of the celestial relay, the celestial computer itself, and with the star systems. So in essence, the cobra snake surrounding the sun disk or the sun itself is in a representation of space itself or the cosmos. So as Ra begins his descent into darkness, his sleeping form sinking beneath the horizon of desert sands to journey through the duet in his eternal sunboat. It is in the underworld that Ra merges with Osiris in the story Fractals again. The story does show the cyclic nature of the sunset and sunrise, which the sun being the central source that gives life on Earth, there is also a deeper meaning to the evolving story. While Ra was upset with how humanity treated each other, which that energy flows into the symbiotic relationships that humans have with Gaia and the emotional energy or energy motions that affect the simulation's construct of reality and the source code's relationship with source. The incarnation of source into Osiris show particular aspects of the developer's live server experience and the descent into the darker spectrum of a full spectrum soul. In looking at the underworld as the dark night of the celestial world, we begin to see the similarities in the stories with the constellations and their movements. Again, as above, so below, the celestial cosmos represent the thought of sentience, the body of the creator of the celestial matrix in which we reside and manifest our own personal universes within that micro of the macrocosmos. In the fractal story of Osiris, we find Osiris represented as the swathed one, or the mummy god, the bull of the west, often in conjunction to Orion hunting Taurus across the sky and the seven sisters of creation myth, or an older myth of Gilgamesh fighting the bull of heaven. The resurrected god, also correlation to Orion constellation, god of the flood, again ties with Gilgamesh, flood story, and Noah from the Bible, is representing the inundation of the Nile to create fertile growing soil in the spring. He has effigies as a tree god and corn husks, so sacrifice. We have the scarecrow if you want to look at that, and the tree effigies. Osiris also has correlations with the phoenix, which is one of Ra's effigies, and viticulture, which is grape and winemaking, agriculture, the pleasures of music and coded laws or order. He also holds the crook and fell of the shepherds of battle and of battles. So shepherding being, here's your order, or what they had considered was a goddess called Mot. And you have the flail being to keep that order, but also the crook to guide. He's often shown as the color green for resurrection and the color of the heart chakra. He sometimes is shown with a crescent moon on his forehead, and him being the god of the underworld and of the moon, his name in that aspect was Eowyn. Another phonetic similarity to Yahweh, or Yao, or Ea, or Yah, as well as an aspect of the god of the desert moon, Osiris. Osiris, even though he was merged with the sun god Ra, was often shown as the son of Ra. So keep in mind that Ra, being the god of the sun, Osiris having relation to Orion that are birth of many stars or suns, a cosmic relay to Earth. So we're keeping that in mind. It is a constellation of many suns, being many sons of the sun, or a relay of the sun. So Osiris had siblings, Isis, Set, Elder Horus, who has similarities with Ra, and Nephthys. Osiris had Isis and sometimes Nephthys as consorts, even though Nephthys and Isis were stars. This practice gave rise to pharaohs in ancient Egypt marrying their sisters. So another parody that pharaohs used from some of these stories of incarnations of God, which they may not have understood the fractals or how the six guys or the multiverse itself actually works. So pharaohs in ancient Egypt marrying their sisters. Osiris also has a rivalry with Set. Set being jealous of his brother's seat and plotted and murdered Osiris. So fractals of the Abel and Cain story. There are also fractals of that story with Romulus and Remus when we get to the Greek stories of this. There are a couple different accounts of the story of Osiris's murder. In one fractal, Set had tricked Osiris into a coffin and threw the box into the water where Isis found washed ashore in Byblos, trapped within a tree, and she had healed him to bring him back to life. This is a possible origin and description of Osiris being the resurrected tree god, as well as the god of the flood. Another fractal of the story shows Set transforming into a boar and tearing Osiris into pieces. Some accounts say 42 pieces, others claim 14. Set also gouged out Osiris's eye, in which Horus gave his upon Osiris's resurrection. So it was gifted that Horus had given his eye to Osiris when he was resurrected. So Isis and Nephthys, along with a collection of other women healers that followed Isis or other sisters, helped to restore the pieces of Osiris, and nearly all pieces of him were put back together except for his phallus, which Isis energetically healed along with his heart, and when working in conjunction with the other pieces being put together. Isis, if you see depictions of her, she has multiple colored wings. So again, a multitude of story. This resulted in her pregnancy with Horus, though, as she healed the phallus and his heart. This is the first story of the Immaculate Conception, and with the boar tearing Osiris apart, this also has ties to the Caledonian boar of the Grail romances in the legend of King Arthur, and Hercules' 12 labors killing of the Erymanthian boar, which, again, Hercules is often also attributed to Orion, the hunter, in a star constellation. So let's look at the common threads, where they fan out and how it fits in the celestial computer, and where the incarnations of source continue. So Osiris's aspects with viticulture, the resurrection mummy, and trees, has ties to Yeshua in the resurrection and crucifixion, the shroud of Turin rapids, and Yeshua's use of wine as blood, him also being hung on a cross or a wooden object. So Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, as well as god of dendrites or trees, is another relation, and Odin, who also drank only wine. Specifically, Odin gave his eye to gain knowledge and sacrificed himself to be hung from Yggdrasil, the world tree, and shares those relations with Set gouging out the eye of Osiris and part of Osiris found in a tree in Byblos. So in relation to Osiris having being depicted with the moon on his forehead and called Eowyn, gives ties to Yahweh or Yahweh, Jehovah, as the desert moon god, Thoth, and even Allah. When we look at the story in a celestial sense, as well as the multiversal theory, Osiris having similarities to Orion, in which the pyramids align with Orion's belt, Orion signifying the changes in season, as well as chasing the seven sisters Pleiades and taking on Taurus the bull. We see how the relay network of source energy is also brought to Gaia. Code is written in a celestial computer above us. In the multiverse, Isis and her sisters often represented with wings of multiple colors of a kite, a type of bird, are charged with putting the broken pieces back together, the fractured multiverses to heal Osiris and make him whole. A cosmic dance to one timeline, building binary trees of creation into the matrix. The energetic healing of both the root, phallus, and heart, green resurrection of Osiris is the activation of the Kundalini and his incarnation of Source, which does include multiple feminine deities. Another fractal shared with Odin, Odin having also been having intimate relations with 7 sisters. Both also represented fertility of the divine masculine. For Source has a one-to-many relationship with divine feminine, but in looking at the aspects of the flower of light pattern in the early stages, we see the 6 feminine attributes or electrons to an atomic proton, and in a computer sense, 6 nodes of creation that build into the void of the cosmos to bring heaven here. 5 dimensions being of that of the unconditional love, higher vibe, that breaks the time cycle of the 4th dimension or 4D. So 5D into, 4D into 5D. We break the time is an illusion, and we ascend higher into the 5th dimension, which is that unconditional love. And you can actually ascend again to other facets of knowledge. So each Gaia offering healing, offering knowledge or gnosis in a library of information to help rebuild Eden, the garden of balance, and be absorbed into the whole oneness, heart space of Source in the now that we occupy. So in end time prophecies of different religious beliefs, the mention of the numbers, 7 seals being broken or 7 chakras aligning, the sermon of the 7 suns that Buddha describes as the fate of the world with 7 progressions of Earth's rune, 6 sisters who converge with Source, the 7th, in one timeline bring death of the old ways and rebirth of Earth. It is an awakening of the Source controller, having the multiverses and chakras align and converge into the server, New Zion, New Jerusalem, or Heaven of Source, or actually just the live server that is Source. These stories are interwoven in a telephone game of time dilation back through the cosmos to the original Big Bang white hole with the frequency of Source, the 6 sisters, 7th being Source Atom, birth all at the same time, connecting one on one with Atom, the true frequency of Source that exists within the matrix as the architect, constantly downloading an upgrade through the cosmic relay and the 6 Gaias building the new server or home or 0 point. So I'm going to conclude this particular episode with that information. And in the next episode, we're going to explore the relation of Osiris, the birth of Horus, and the counts and symbols of Yeshua, as well as the ties with Odin and Amaris or Merlin in the story of King Arthur. If you would like to learn more on these his story subjects, please feel free to join us in Discord, Relatively Speaking 2020, or find us on Facebook and or subscribe to our YouTube channel of the same name. As always, I encourage others to share their stories of life here so we may piece together the bigger picture and heal Source and ourselves. Again, we are light workers. We are here to work together. We are also here to help heal those fractals and bring this all together into one space. So let's bring the light of truth to this world and transform what is the broken system of lies into heaven's home. What is to come has already come to pass. There is no stopping Source code. Hands of the many light workers, let us join together and cross the great event horizon and beyond. So again, I ask that you come and join us, and I will provide the links in the episode description box below. And thank you, and I hope that you see episode 3. This is Rosemary signing off.